Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric Kings series on some of my favorite beat 'em up games of all time. And if you can't tell already, today we're talking about both Dungeons & Dragons Tower of Doom as well as Shadow over Mystara. And a few weeks ago I made a video on Alien vs Predator and said it was the best Capcom beat 'em up game ever made, and I had a ton of comments saying, what about the D&D games? And I always knew I had an episode coming. These games are every bit as good as Alien vs Predator. It just kind of comes down to your decision on what sort of vibe and what sort of genre you want to be playing around in as far as the theme is concerned, because obviously Alien vs Predator and Dungeons & Dragons, completely different fantasy worlds. One is sci-fi and alien based, the other definitely not. But I will readily admit that these games are absolute perfection as well. I grew up playing them in Vermont when I was a kid. I played both Tower of Doom as well as Shadow over Mystara and absolutely fell in love with them. Before I get much further involved though, do me a huge favor, down below hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. Now mechanically, these two games do absolutely everything correct. The combat is intense, the strikes and action are good, all of the hit detection and alignment works 100% of the time. It's never going to fight you on if you feel like you should have hit the opponent and you whiffed it. Some beat 'em ups definitely have those issues. None of the Capcom beat 'em ups ever have, and I absolutely love all of the sprites and all of the characters in this game, the skeletons and everything else. And honestly, if you're going to play a D&D game, you got to play as the dwarf. It's the only right way to play. But here's the thing about the D&D games. This isn't a strike against Capcom. I've just never played D&D in my life. I didn't grow up with any friends who played. It was never really introduced to me as a kid, so I don't have that same intrinsic attachment to it on a nostalgia front that other people do, versus Alien vs Predator, where I watched all the movies as a kid, loved the video games, so that's why I slightly prefer it by 1%. But the D&D games are straight up incredible, and the fact that you have 4-player support and a ton of story and a longer quest probably does actually technically make this quote-unquote better than Alien vs Predator. But a lot of times when I say the best game, what I mean is mechanically it is outstanding. It is my favorite version of the game. Something like Tower of Doom here is still a straight up 10 out of 10, and you absolutely should play it if you never have. The best part is you can play it on Mr. FPJ like I'm playing it here today. There's been a ton of re-releases, and if you really want to spend some cash, there is a double CD set for the Japanese Sega Center, which I have on my shelf. Probably not the best way to play it these days, but honestly I bought it like 15 years ago because I do love the titles. And what I really always love about them is that you get all of these different sub-weapons you can pick out, you get different branching paths. These games always felt like they were destined to be ported to home console because they had that console length as well as the replayability, which definitely helped in arcades collecting quarters if you wanted to see everything the game had to offer, but also helps in a home environment, giving you replayability because you have to play the game 2, maybe even 3 times to see everything it has to offer. And as far as the art style, all of the sprites, the background layers, and these massive bosses, they just look spectacular. Now again, if you are a huge fan of D&D, if you played back in the day, or if you play now, something like the Displacer Beast might make more contextual sense. The only reason I know that this exists is because I have played the games, but I'm sure in a lot of the D&D lore, the monsters that show up, this is very famous stuff. But it really is one of those things. It just depends on what you played back in the day, not just for video games, but also for board games and role-playing games, as to what you might like better. But these troglodytes here, basically looking like mermen, absolutely look amazing in Tower of Doom. Now after the soundtrack sample, we're going to move over to Shadow over Mystara, which is my preferred game of the two games, but honestly you could flip a coin, play either one first, and you would still have as good of a time. It just kind of depends on what you're vibing on, and that really is the thing about these sort of titles. You can pick whichever one you want to play first, and it's going to be absolutely amazing from start to finish. And I also love that you get the progression system. You get to level up your character with XP and even go into a shop with the gold and jewels you collected and be able to upgrade your character between levels. But here comes your soundtrack sample, 45 seconds of Tower of Doom, and we're going to come right back with Shadow over Mystara. So enjoy. Classic soundtrack, classic bosses, and an absolutely classic game. But now moving over to Shadow over Mystara, you can see that the graphics have gotten a little bit better because one game came out 2 years later, so obviously the developers at Capcom had the knowledge and experience of 2 years of CPS2 development to basically make things look ever so slightly better. And I'm not saying Shadow over Mystara is fundamentally better looking, it's like 10% better in the sprites and overall presentation. And again, it is my preferred game out of the two, but you leave me a comment down below and you tell me if you played both, which one do you prefer? Because I feel like I'm going to get a pretty even 50-50 split between the two games. That is a really impressive thing that Capcom can make two games in the same franchise 2 years apart, and still to this day people debate over which one is better. The best part is both are 10 out of 10s, both are Hall of Fame first ballot level good beat 'em ups that do absolutely nothing wrong in the gameplay, presentation, story, soundtrack wise. It is just a straight up perfect game from start to finish. I would say at least on Shadow over Mystara, it does seem like in a few screens you get a couple more enemy sprites on screen at once, and again, having that extra time developing for the CPS2 just gives you more of an intrinsic understanding of how the hardware functions and how you can get more out of it, because like any platform, the launch day games are going to look completely different than the final games published on the platform, and CPS2 is no different. Play the original Street Fighter 2 Turbo Edition and then go to Alpha 3, you're going to see a night and day difference in the overall power and graphics. But I love the bosses in Shadow over Mystara. I love the story a little bit more. I love the branching paths, and I even love that the War Machine here has a basic Roadrunner moment where the coyote just is suspended in midair and doesn't fall until they actually notice that they're floating over the ravine. A little bit of slapstick comedy never hurt anybody, whether it's in a cartoon or in an arcade game. And I love this overland route as well, where you take this basic War Machine train through the woods. That is the fun part about both of these games. You're going to have completely different branching paths, and you can kind of pick how you want to go through the game. It gives you the creativity and control to make your own story, which is always good in an arcade game or any other video game. And I think that was really smart on behalf of Capcom's developers, understanding that Dungeons & Dragons really is about choosing your own path and kind of playing the game, at least on the tabletop version, how you want. There's different areas to go. You kind of have that granular decision-making authority to go in the direction you want. So having that in the arcade game 100% works in context of the source material. And I would say some of the boss sprites here as well on Shadow over Mystara, Dark Warrior 1, a pretty funny name because it is just a 1 at the end, feels like it is a bigger sprite than anything we really saw in the beginning half of the game on Tower of Doom, and that is always awesome. And of course, just like the first game, you're going to get a selection of characters. You can kind of decide who works for you, but for me, honestly, in these games, if you're not playing as the dwarf, it is the wrong decision. Just something about the dwarf character and his power just 100% does it for me. But I love that skeleton's hopping around, so excited that they were actually able to win the day. Shadow over Mystara, just like Tower of Doom, is a straight up stone cold classic, and just like Tower of Doom, it has an incredible soundtrack. So I'm going to go ahead and let you listen for 35 seconds this time, and then leave me a comment afterwards and tell me on the soundtrack front, do you prefer Tower of Doom or Shadow over Mystara? Because I would be very curious. And the next boss is iconic for D&D, so enjoy it, and I'll be right back with more. Absolutely incredible soundtrack, and if I had to vote, I would say Shadow over Mystara has the better music compared to Tower of Doom in my opinion. And the funny thing is, when I first played this game and I saw the Beholder, I thought to myself, why is the floating eye monster from Big Trouble in Little China in a Dungeons & Dragons game? Because I watched that movie before I ever played the game, so for me, when I see that, I instantaneously go to Big Trouble in Little China. And that's just a little anecdote to explain to you more about how I basically have no history with Dungeons & Dragons outside of playing these games. That is something that is common common for me. When I talk about anime arcade games, I basically say the only experience I have with the anime property is having played the game. It's just one of those things. Never got into anime, never got into D&D back in the day, but I definitely got into arcade beat 'em ups, and both Tower of Doom and Shadow of Mystara are some of the best beat 'em ups ever made. And I know I said Alien vs Predator is Capcom's best, but these are definite candidates. And when you have so many good games that could be considered the best, that's how you know a developer absolutely nailed it in this generation. And the CPS and CPS2 era of Capcom is some of the best beat 'em ups ever made. But again, vote down below Tower of Doom or Shadow over Mystara. I would be curious to hear, or you can say AVP is still the best. I accept that too. But we're done. I'm going to beat the Harpy, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.